From 1930 to 1933, more than 9,000 American banks closed their doors, taking away all the savings of the people who had put money in them. The money supply contracts. There is not enough money in circulation in the economy. Banks are unable to make loans, which is one way the money supply increases. And so we have deflation. This is a period of lowering prices. Now you may think, awesome, things are cheaper. But no, deflation is disastrous and completely destructive for an economy. Because what it means is the businesses are not making enough money, so they have to lay off workers, close factories. They're unable to pay off debt that was hired at the old prices, and it creates a vicious cycle, a downward spiral that the economy can't break out of. So we have price drops leading to layoffs, leading to decrease in demand, and so on and so forth. By 1931, the federal government wants to prop up the dollar, and it raises interest rates, meaning it becomes harder to borrow money, which further drops the money supply. This was a terrible mistake. The GDP, which had been $104 billion in 1929, drops to $76.4 billion in 1932, and we see these in these graphs here. And losing that much, almost a quarter of our production, is an economic blow that is going to take us a decade to recover from. If you look over here, you see unemployment, which breaks 25%. In 1932, not according to this graph, but according to, I guess, there's different sources of data. In the 1930s, the unemployment averages around 20%. It never goes below 15% during the decade. Underemployment, meaning people working in jobs where they are not fully utilizing their skills, is over 30% throughout the decade. 1 in 3 people either don't have a job or have a job that doesn't match up with the skills that they have. I don't think there's any doubt that the two worst times to be alive in American history, to be an American, were the Civil War and the Great Depression. Northeast and Midwestern cities were hit the worst. Cleveland had unemployment rates over 50%, Akron, Ohio over 60%, and Toledo over 80%. Can you imagine a city where 4 out of 5 people can't find a job? They turned to state and local relief agencies and charities as well, but they're just overwhelmed. There's no way they can handle a problem like this. That's crazy. And they collapse under the strain. Farm incomes will drop by 60% between 1929 and 1932. Can you imagine if your family had to live on 2/5 of what they're living on right now? Most Americans wouldn't be able to make it in those circumstances. 1/3 of farmers will lose their farm during this period. Now what had happened is Americans had moved into Oklahoma, and they had begun farming there. And they broke the soil with plows and advanced farming techniques, soil that had never been broken, literally never. It had never been plowed. And they unleashed an amount of topsoil into a windy environment. There's never been anything like this in the history of the world. And this created the Dust Bowl. Dust storms that are, I used to think, I've been up to West Texas and Oklahoma, and I've seen dust storms. Nothing you've ever seen, unless you're really old, was like this. These were dust storms that went miles high, that blocked out the sun, that routinely killed people. If you had any sort of breathing problems, asthma or anything like that, you were very likely to die during this period. Children had an incredibly high infant mortality rate because of respiratory problems. Buildings, cities, you see a car down there, entirely buried by these dust storms. This was not simply some wind and some dirt. This was a disaster unlike anything we have ever seen in world history because of this loosening of that topsoil for the first time. It was a man-made disaster. This is a great example of how human beings, through their interaction with the environment, can cause disasters. It was not helped by a decade-long drought and high temperatures the area had never seen, and a complete lack of rain. And of course, that area, as you can see there on the map, comes to be called the Dust Bowl. Both farmers who've lost their farms and factory workers who've lost their jobs will wander the countryside really aimlessly, looking for food or work. Unscrupulous businessmen in California will put up advertisements throughout the country saying that there's plenty of good jobs available in California. Now the goal there is to get all these people who are struggling to move to California and drive labor prices down so they can hire people for nothing. And it works, but it works in a way bigger scale than they ever wanted it to. Thousands and thousands of Americans will travel down Route 66 from the Dust Bowl to California. Regardless of where you're from, you'll get the name Okies, as if they're all from Oklahoma, which they're not. And they will work for starvation wages. They will work in inhumane conditions for almost nothing. If you want to read a great American novel, read John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, which traces a fictional family, the Joad family, from losing its farm in Oklahoma to the nightmare they find in California as one of these laborers.